The gun was cold in my hand, a solid, heavy weight that felt both alien and terrifyingly familiar. Rain lashed against the living room window of my tiny apartment, each drop sounding like a tiny stone thrown against the glass. It was 3:16 a.m. The digital clock on the cable box glowed red in the darkness, a silent countdown to the end. My entire body trembled, not from the cold but from a numbness that had settled deep in my bones, a void that had swallowed every other feeling: hope, joy, even fear. All that was left was this crushing certainty that I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't face another sunrise, another day of pretending I was okay, another moment of the screaming silence in my own head. I was 34 years old, and I was so tired. I closed my eyes, my finger finding the trigger. This was it. The pain would finally stop. But to understand how I got here, I need to take you back to where it all began. It began, really, on a Tuesday afternoon, 6 years earlier, in the conference room of a sleek tech startup in Austin, Texas. The air smelled like expensive coffee and ambition. I was 28, and I felt like I was holding lightning in my hands. My wife Jenny and I had just bought our first house, a cute bungalow with a porch swing we never had time to use. We were teaching Sunday school at our church, and I was leading a small group for young married men. From the outside, my life was a highlight reel of success and faith. I believed it myself. I was Mark Miller, the guy who had it all figured out. I prayed before big meetings, thanked God for my blessings, and genuinely thought the prosperity I was enjoying was a direct reward for my righteousness. The turning point, the first tiny crack in the foundation, was a promotion. I was made senior project lead, which meant more money, more prestige, and a lot more time away from home. At first, Jenny was proud. "God is really blessing your hard work, honey," she'd say, kissing me goodbye as I headed out for another late night. But the late nights became normal. The small group meetings I led started to feel like a chore, another performance. I'd rush in, share a verse I'd skimmed on my phone in the parking lot, and listen to the other guys talk about their struggles with patience or lust or worry. And in my head, I'd be running through my project timelines. My prayers became transactional. God, help me close this deal. Lord, let this presentation be a success. The vibrant, relational faith of my youth was slowly being replaced by a dry, dusty ritual. Before I continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your location and what time it is where you are in the comments. It means the world to me to know who's hearing this story. The first person to see the change in me wasn't Jenny. It was my best friend, Kyle. We'd been friends since college, the kind of friend you call at 2 a.m. when your world is falling apart. He was the best man at my wedding. We met for lunch one day, and I was distracted, checking my phone under the table every few minutes. "You good, man?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "You seem distant." "I'm great," I said, forcing a smile. "Just busy. You know how it is." God is just opening so many doors. Kyle took a long drink of his iced tea. "Yeah, just make sure you're walking through the right ones, Mark. Don't get so busy building your kingdom that you forget which one you're a citizen of." His words irked me. They felt judgmental, like he didn't understand the pressure I was under to provide, to succeed. I shrugged it off. He didn't get it. My success was a blessing, and I was going to be a good steward of it. The real poison, though, started with a woman named Chloe. She was a new designer on my team. Sharp, funny, and she listened to me like I was the most interesting person in the world. At work, I was stressed and demanding. With Chloe, during late nights fueled by takeout and caffeine, I felt seen. I started talking to her about things I hadn't talked to Jenny about in months. My fears about the project, my dreams for the future. It started innocently enough, or at least that's what I told myself. It was just friendship. But my heart was a field left fallow, and the weeds of pride and discontent were growing wild. One night, after a major project milestone, the team went out for drinks. I remember standing at the bar, ordering a round, and feeling Chloe's hand on my arm. "You were amazing today," she said, her eyes bright. And in that moment, something shifted. The moral framework I'd built my life on, my marriage vows, my faith, felt flimsy and far away. It was just a touch, but it was a match held to the dry tinder of my neglected soul. I drove home that night, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold. Jenny was already asleep, a book splayed open on her chest. She'd waited up for me. I stood in the doorway, looking at her peaceful face, and a wave of guilt so violent hit me that I physically staggered. I went into the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. "What are you doing?" I whispered to the haunted man looking back at me. I got down on my knees beside the bathtub, the cold ceramic digging into my skin. "God, forgive me," I prayed, the words feeling hollow. "Take these feelings away. Help me to be the man Jenny deserves." I waited for a feeling of peace, for a divine hand to steady me. All I heard was the hum of the bathroom fan. The silence felt like judgment. The next day at work, I avoided Chloe. I buried myself in spreadsheets and emails. But by lunchtime, I found myself walking past her desk. She smiled, and my resolve crumbled. That's how it started. Not with a big dramatic fall, but with 1,000 small surrenders. A longer than necessary conversation here. A secret joke there. A lunch that just happened because we were both working so hard. I was compartmentalizing my life, building walls between my faith, my marriage, and the slow-motion wreck I was creating at work. I was still leading my small group, still standing beside Jenny in church on Sundays, singing the songs, but my heart was a house divided, and it was beginning to collapse. The confrontation came on a Friday night. Jenny had made my favorite meal, lasagna, and lit candles. She was wearing the dress I'd bought her for our anniversary. I was late, of course, distracted by a flurry of texts from Chloe that I'd quickly deleted. Over dinner, Jenny was quiet. "Is everything okay at work?" she finally asked, her voice soft but steady. "Yeah, of course," I said too quickly. "Just the usual stress." She put her fork down. "Kyle called me today." My blood ran cold. "Kyle? Why?" "He said he's worried about you. He said you've been different, distant. He said you canceled on him 3 times in the last month." She looked at me, and her eyes, usually so full of light and warmth, were searching mine, looking for the man she married. "Mark, look at me. Please. Are you in some kind of trouble? Is it money? You can tell me. We can face it together." I felt a surge of anger at Kyle. How dare he go behind my back? How dare he interfere? The lie came easily, coated in self-righteous indignation. "I can't believe he called you. He's just jealous, Jenny. He's stuck in his boring job and he sees me moving up, getting the things we've prayed for, and he can't handle it. He's trying to cause problems." I saw the doubt flicker in her eyes, but she wanted to believe me. She loved me. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "I'm sure," I said, reaching across the table and taking her hand. It felt like a betrayal all its own. "I'm sorry I've been so busy. I'll do better, I promise." She squeezed my hand, a tear escaping down her cheek. "I miss you." That should have been my wake-up call. That should have been the moment I broke down and told her everything, begged for her forgiveness, and ran back to God. But the pride, the fear of losing everything, my job, my reputation, my comfortable life, was too strong. I doubled down. I told myself I could fix it. I could slowly pull back from Chloe, be a better husband, and no one ever had to know. I could manage my own sin. I didn't need a savior. I needed a better strategy. The following Wednesday, I told my small group I was taking a break for a few weeks due to work pressures. They were supportive, of course. They prayed for me, for my strength and endurance. I sat there, my head bowed, feeling like the biggest fraud in the world. As I was leaving, Kyle caught up to me in the parking lot. "Mark, wait." I didn't want to talk to him. I kept walking towards my car. "I don't have time, Kyle. I've got a lot going on." He grabbed my arm, not hard, but enough to make me stop. "I'm not your enemy, man," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you. Jenny loves you. Whatever this is, it's not worth it." "Please." I wrenched my arm away. "You need to back off, Kyle. You have no idea what you're talking about. Just stay out of my life." The hurt in his eyes was a physical blow, but I was too far gone to care. I got in my car and drove away, leaving my best friend standing alone in the dark church parking lot. I was isolating everyone who loved me, cutting the ropes that could have pulled me back to shore. I was adrift in a sea of my own making. And the storm was about to break. I had no idea that the consequences of my choices were already in motion, a tidal wave of truth that would hit when I least expected it, on a night when I thought I had nowhere left to fall. I was heading for rock bottom, and the impact was going to shatter everything I thought I was. The storm broke on a Thursday. It was 11:23 p.m., and I was in my home office, pretending to work on a budget report. In reality, I was staring at my phone, waiting for a text from Chloe that I knew I shouldn't want. Jenny had gone to bed hours ago, the silence between us a heavy, living thing in the house. I heard the soft creak of the floorboards in the hall and assumed it was her getting a glass of water. Then my office door swung open. It was Jenny. But it wasn't the Jenny from the candlelit dinner. This Jenny's face was pale, streaked with tears she hadn't bothered to wipe away. In her hand, she held my iPad. My heart stopped. I used the iPad for work, and I'd been logged into my iMessage account there. I'd been so careful on my phone, deleting everything. I'd forgotten about the iPad. Who is she? Jenny's voice was a whisper, but it filled the room, sharp and broken. Who is who? The lie was automatic, a reflex born of panic. "Jenny, what are you talking about?" She didn't scream. She didn't throw the iPad. She just held it up, and on the screen I could see the last message I'd sent to Chloe a few hours earlier. "I wish I was there with you right now." Chloe's response was a winking emoji. Soon. The world tilted. All the air left the room. "Jenny, I can explain." I started, standing up, my chair rolling back and hitting the wall with a thud. "Explain what?" she asked, her voice terrifyingly calm. "Explain how you've been lying to me for months? Explain how you stood in this house, in our home, and told me Kyle was jealous while you were doing this." The calm shattered. "Was any of it real? The prayers? The marriage counseling we did last year? Was it all just an act?" "No, it wasn't an act." "I love you." The words sounded cheap and hollow. "Don't," she snarled, the first flash of real anger igniting in her eyes. "Don't you dare say that to me. You don't get to use those words." She looked at the iPad again, her face crumpling. "Her name is Chloe? From your work?" She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "I packed your lunch for you last week. I put a note in it. Were you with her when you ate it?" I had no answer. The guilt was a physical weight, crushing me. I had done this. I had taken the most beautiful, trusting thing in my life, and I had smashed it. "Get out," she said, her voice flat and final. "Jenny, please, this is my house too. Let's talk about this." "Get out." She looked at me, and the love that had always been there for me was gone, replaced by a grief so profound it was like looking into a deep, dark well. "I can't breathe in the same room as you. I need you to leave. Right now." So I left. I walked out of my house with nothing but the clothes on my back and my wallet. I didn't take a bag. I didn't take a toothbrush. It felt like a punishment I deserved. I got in my car and drove, with no destination in mind. I ended up at a cheap motel on the interstate, the kind with flickering neon signs and doors that opened directly to the parking lot. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and bleach. I sat on the edge of the hard bed, the floral bedspread rough under my hands, and I finally did what I hadn't been able to do in my own bathroom. I wept. I cried until my throat was raw and my head pounded. I cried for Jenny, for the pain I'd caused her. I cried for the man I thought I was, the man who was now dead. The next few days were a blur of misery. I called in sick to work, too ashamed to face Chloe, whose texts were now piling up, growing increasingly confused and then angry. I moved from the motel to a short-term furnished apartment, a sterile, beige box that felt like a prison. The silence was the worst part. No Jenny humming in the kitchen, no sound of the TV from the living room. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the roar of my own thoughts. I tried to pray. I got on my knees on the thin, scratchy carpet. God, please, fix this. Please, make her forgive me. Make this go away. It was the same kind of transactional prayer I'd been making for years. Give me. Fix this. Make it easy. The silence that answered me was deeper and more profound than any I'd ever experienced. It wasn't the comforting silence of God's presence. It was the empty silence of abandonment. I felt like I was shouting into a void. I opened my Bible, but the words were just black marks on a page. They had no power, no meaning for me anymore. My faith, which I had treated like a handy tool for success, had broken in my hands when I needed it most. A week after I'd been thrown out, I swallowed my pride and drove to Kyle's house. It was a humble little place with a messy yard where his kids' toys were scattered. He answered the door, his expression unreadable. He didn't look surprised to see me. "Can I come in?" I asked, my voice cracking. He hesitated for a long moment, then stepped aside. We sat in his living room, surrounded by the evidence of a real, messy, loving life. I told him everything. I didn't try to minimize it or make excuses. I told him about Chloe, about the lies, about the pride, about the slow, sickening slide. When I finished, I looked at him, waiting for the condemnation I knew I deserved. He just sighed, a deep, weary sound. I knew something was wrong, Mark. I just didn't know it was this. "Jenny hates me," I whispered. "Yeah," Kyle said, not unkindly. "She probably does right now, and she has every right to." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "What are you going to do now?" "I don't know. I've prayed, Kyle. I've begged God, and nothing. It's like he's not even there. Maybe he never was." Saying the words out loud was terrifying, like admitting the sky was no longer blue. Kyle was quiet for a minute. "Maybe," he said slowly. "God isn't who you thought he was. You've been treating him like a divine vending machine. Put in a prayer, get out a blessing. Put in some good behavior, get out a promotion. But that's not God. That's an idol you built yourself." He looked me straight in the eye. "Maybe the silence isn't him leaving you. Maybe it's him finally getting you to be quiet enough to listen to what he's been trying to say all along." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. They didn't bring me comfort. They brought conviction, a deep, unsettling knowledge that he was right. My entire faith had been a performance, a means to an end. And now that the performance was over, I was standing on a dark, empty stage, completely alone. I left Kyle's house feeling more lost than when I'd arrived. His words echoed in my head, but they offered no solace. Only a deeper, more frightening problem. If my whole understanding of God was wrong, then who was he? And how could I possibly find him now, in the wreckage of the life I had destroyed? The following Monday, I had to go back to work. Walking into that office was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. The whispers started the moment I stepped off the elevator. People quickly looked away when I met their eyes. I went to my desk, my head down. Chloe was at her desk too. She didn't look at me. The rejection from her was a minor sting compared to the gaping wound Jenny had left. But it still hurt. I had blown up my life for this, for a woman who now couldn't stand the sight of me. My boss, Brenda, called me into her office at 10 o'clock. She was a tough, no-nonsense woman in her 50s. She didn't mince words. "Mark, I'm going to be direct. Your personal life has become a company problem. The situation with Chloe has created a hostile work environment. HR is involved." I stared at my hands, knotted together in my lap. "I understand. We value the work you've done here," she continued, her tone not unkind, but firm. "But effective immediately. You're being placed on administrative leave. We'll be conducting a full review. You should go home. We'll be in touch." And just like that, the other pillar of my identity was gone. The job, the success, the title, it was all stripped away. I was no longer senior project lead Mark Miller. I was just Mark, the adulterer, the liar, the man with nothing. I drove back to the beige apartment. I sat in the living room as the sun went down, not bothering to turn on any lights. The darkness felt appropriate. I had lost my wife. I had lost my best friend. I had lost my job. I had lost my church. I had, it seemed, lost my God. The numbness from the night with the gun was starting to set in again, but this time it was colder, more absolute. This was the consequence. This was the rock bottom I had been hurtling toward. I thought about Jenny's face, twisted in pain. I thought about Kyle's words about God. I thought about the crushing silence in my prayers. A thought, dark and insistent, began to whisper in the back of my mind. It would be better for everyone if you just disappeared. Jenny could move on. The company wouldn't have a scandal. You're a problem that needs to be solved. The whisper became a roar. The numbness became a plan. I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate. I walked to the closet where I kept a small safe. I knew where I kept the key. I opened it, and I took out my grandfather's old hunting rifle. I loaded it with hands that were strangely, terribly steady. This wasn't a cry for help. This was a logical conclusion. I sat back down on the floor, my back against the sofa. The red numbers of the clock on the cable box glowed in the dark. 3:16 a.m. I placed the cold steel barrel against my temple. I closed my eyes. I took a deep, shuddering breath. This was it. And then someone knocked on my door. The sound was so foreign, so utterly out of place, that for a second I thought I'd imagined it. A knock. A firm, clear knock on my apartment door. At 3:17 in the morning. My finger froze on the trigger. Every nerve ending, which had been numb seconds before, was suddenly screaming. The rifle felt impossibly heavy. Who? Why? My mind, fogged with despair, scrambled for an answer. Cops? Had a neighbor heard something? But I hadn't made a sound. Landlord? At this hour? It made no sense. The knock came again. 3 sharp raps. Knock, knock, knock. A bizarre, irrational thought flashed through my mind. What if it's Jenny? It was impossible, but the hope was a painful jolt. Maybe she'd had a change of heart. Maybe she'd sensed something. I slowly, carefully, lowered the rifle from my head. The cold metal left a temporary imprint on my skin. I set the gun on the floor beside me, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I felt dizzy. I stood up, my legs weak and unsteady. I crept to the door, my socks silent on the cheap laminate flooring. I didn't turn on the light. I leaned in and put my eye to the peephole. The fisheye lens distorting the world outside. It was Kyle. He was standing there under the harsh fluorescent light of the hallway. His shoulders slumped, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket. He looked exhausted. He wasn't looking at the door. He was staring at the floor, as if he was as confused to be there as I was to see him. My first feeling was a sharp stab of disappointment. It wasn't Jenny. Of course it wasn't Jenny. Then, a wave of anger washed over me. What was he doing here? Had he come to give me another lecture? To tell me more about how I didn't understand God? I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to see anyone. I took a step back from the door, deciding to stay silent. He would think I was asleep or gone, and he would leave. But he didn't leave. He lifted his head and looked directly at the peephole, as if he could sense me on the other side. "Mark," he said, his voice muffled but clear through the thin wood. "I know you're in there. Please, open the door." I didn't move. I held my breath. "I'm not leaving, man," he said, and his voice cracked with the emotion I couldn't name. "I had a dream, a bad one, about you, and I can't leave." A dream? He woke up from a dream and drove across town in the middle of the night? It was crazy. It was irrational. And it was the first thing that had pierced the numb shell around my heart in weeks. I felt a tear escape and trace a hot path down my cheek. I reached out a trembling hand and unlocked the deadbolt. The click was deafening in the quiet apartment. I turned the knob and opened the door a few inches. The hallway light spilled into my dark apartment, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air. Kyle's eyes met mine. He didn't look angry or judgmental. He just looked sad and worried. "Kyle," I croaked, my voice rough from disuse and crying. "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted past me into the darkness of the apartment, and I saw his eyes widen slightly. I followed his line of sight. The hunting rifle was clearly visible on the floor, a dark, sinister shape in the gloom. His face went pale. He looked back at me, and the understanding in his eyes was immediate and terrible. He didn't ask a stupid question like, "What's going on?" He knew. He knew exactly what he had interrupted. Without a word, he pushed the door open the rest of the way and stepped inside. He didn't hug me. He didn't try to take the gun. He just walked past me, over to the rifle, and bent down. He picked it up with a reverence one might use to handle a sacred object or a poisonous snake. He broke the action, saw the cartridge inside, and his shoulders slumped even further. He ejected the round, caught it in his hand, and placed the now unloaded gun gently on my kitchen table. He pocketed the bullet. Then he turned back to me. I was still standing by the open door, frozen, exposed, utterly broken. He walked over to me, and he did something I will never forget for the rest of my life. He reached out and slowly, carefully, closed the door, shutting out the world. Then he turned to me, and he wrapped his arms around me in a tight, fierce hug. I stiffened. I didn't deserve this. I deserved his anger, his disgust, not this grace. But he held on. And then I broke. The dam inside me shattered. I collapsed into him, my body racked with sobs I didn't even know I had left in me. I cried for the shame, for the loss, for the terror of what I had almost done. I cried like a little boy. And Kyle, my friend, just held me up, his own tears wet against my shoulder. When the storm finally subsided, he led me to the sofa, and we sat down in the dark. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was my ragged breathing slowly returning to normal. Finally, he said, "I'm so sorry, Mark." "Sorry?" I whispered, confused. "What do you have to be sorry for? I'm the one who—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner," he said quietly. "I'm sorry I let my own hurt feelings keep me away. I was angry at you for what you said in the parking lot. I was licking my wounds. That was selfish." His words undid me all over again. He was apologizing to me. "I don't understand," I said, my voice thick. "Why are you here?" How are you here?" He took a deep breath. "I told you, I had a dream. It was stupid, really. I just dreamed you were drowning. Not in water, but in blackness. And you were calling for help, but no sound was coming out. I woke up with your name on my lips and this absolute certainty that I needed to come. Right now." I almost rolled over and went back to sleep. I told myself I was being an idiot. But I couldn't. The feeling wouldn't go away. He looked at me, his face earnest in the dim light. So I got in my car and I drove. I didn't know what I was going to do when I got here. Ring the bell? Bang on the door? I just knew I had to come. We sat in silence again. The clock on the cable box now read 4:02 a.m. The world outside was still dark, but the absolute midnight of my soul had ever so slightly shifted. The gun was on the table, unloaded. I was still here. "Kyle," I said, the words barely a whisper. I prayed. I begged God, and there was nothing. Just silence. Why was there silence? Kyle was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I don't know, Mark. I really don't. Maybe when we've been talking to God for so long with the wrong voice, it takes a while to remember how to speak to Him with our real one, or to be quiet enough to hear His." He gestured around the dark apartment. "But He's not silent tonight. He sent a very tired, very confused friend who had a bad dream to bang on your door at 3:17 in the morning. That's not a coincidence. That's an answer. It's just not the one you were looking for." For the first time, the silence in the room didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. It felt like there was a third person in the room with us, a presence that had been there all along, working in the only way left to get through to me, through the stubborn, faithful heart of a friend I had thrown away. Kyle didn't preach. He didn't quote Bible verses. He just stayed. He made a pot of terrible, weak coffee using the cheap grounds I had in the cupboard, and we sat on my sofa as the sky slowly began to lighten from black to deep blue outside my window. The problem wasn't solved. Jenny still hated me. I still had no job. The consequences of my sins were still waiting for me in the harsh light of day. But the absolute, final despair had been interrupted. A single, thin thread of hope had been thrown to me in the dark, and it had been strong enough to keep me from drowning. As the first ray of sunlight pierced the horizon, Kyle looked at me. "You're not staying here today. You're coming home with me. My kids are loud, my house is a mess, and my wife will feed you until you pop. You're not going to be alone." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him he had done enough, that I didn't deserve his kindness. But for the first time, I didn't have the energy for pride. I just nodded. "Okay," I whispered. The long road of facing what I had done was ahead of me, a road I was terrified to walk. But as I stood up to pack a bag, I realized I wasn't going to have to walk it alone. And that made all the difference in the world. The night was over. Morning had come. And I was still here to see it. The world looked different in the light of day. Driving to Kyle's house, the suburban streets seemed sharper, the colors more vivid. As if I'd been living in a fog for months and had only just stepped out of it. The sheer normalcy of it all was jarring. People were mowing their lawns, getting into their cars to go to work, living their lives. My life had almost ended a few hours ago, and the world just kept turning. It was a terrifying and strangely comforting thought. Kyle's house was exactly as I'd left it the last time, toys still scattered across the lawn, a bicycle lying on its side near the driveway. It felt like a lifetime ago. As we walked to the front door, I braced myself for I didn't know what. Judgment? Pity? The door swung open before we reached it. Lisa, Kyle's wife, stood there. She was holding a sippy cup and had a baby balanced on her hip. Her eyes, warm and kind, met mine, and I saw a flicker of something. Sadness, understanding. I wasn't sure, but there was no anger, no condemnation. "Mark," she said, her voice soft. "Come on in. I've got coffee on." It was the most normal greeting in the world, and it nearly undid me all over again. The inside of their home was chaos in the best way. The TV was playing a cartoon, two of their kids were building a fort out of couch cushions, and the smell of bacon and pancakes hung in the air. It was messy and loud and full of life. It was everything my sterile, silent apartment was not. I stood awkwardly in the entryway, feeling like a ghost visiting the land of the living. "Sit," Kyle said, nudging me toward the kitchen table. "Eat." I didn't think I could eat. My stomach was a tangled knot of nerves and residual shame. But Lisa placed a plate stacked with pancakes in front of me, and Kyle shoved the syrup bottle my way. So I ate. I ate because it was easier than talking, because it gave me something to do with my hands, because the simple, warm food was a tangible act of grace I didn't know how to refuse. After breakfast, Kyle took the older kids to school. Lisa put the baby down for a nap and then sat across from me at the table, cradling her coffee mug. The relative quiet felt heavy. "Kyle told me," she said simply, "about why he went over last night." I looked down at my hands, unable to meet her gaze. "I'm so sorry, Lisa, that you have to be involved in this mess." "Mark, look at me," she said. I forced my eyes up. "We love you. That hasn't changed. What you did was wrong. It hurt a lot of people, especially Jenny. And you're going to have to walk a long, hard road to make any of that right." She paused, letting the truth of her words sink in. "But wanting to end your life? That's a lie from the pit of hell, and we are not going to let that lie win. Not in this house." Her words were firm, full of a conviction I had lost. She wasn't minimizing my sin. She was fighting a bigger battle. She was drawing a line in the sand against the despair that had almost consumed me. When Kyle returned, he had a plan. It wasn't a grand, dramatic plan. It was practical, humble, and exactly what I needed. "First things first," he said, sitting down. "You're going to call your boss. Right now. You're going to tell her you're taking a medical leave of absence for severe depression, and that you'll be in touch with HR about the formal process." "I can't." I started to protest. The shame of facing Brenda, of admitting I was broken, felt overwhelming. "You can," Kyle said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You have to. Running from the consequences is what got you here. Facing them is the only way out." He slid his phone across the table to me. "Use mine. Do it now." My hand trembled as I picked up the phone. Making that call was one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. Brenda was professional, but cold. She agreed to the medical leave and told me to expect paperwork from HR. When I hung up, I felt drained, but also a tiny bit lighter. I had told the truth. I had named the darkness. It was a first step. The next part of the plan was harder. "You need to tell Jenny," Kyle said gently. My blood ran cold. "Tell her what?" That I almost... I couldn't say the words. "Kyle, no. That would just be selfish. It would hurt her more. It would be like emotional blackmail." "It's not about making you feel better, Mark," Lisa chimed in from the sink where she was washing dishes. "It's about truth. She's your wife. She has a right to know the state of her husband. Keeping this from her is just another form of lying." The logic was sound, but it felt like climbing a mountain made of glass. Kyle drove me back to my apartment so I could get my own phone. I stood in the living room. The morning sun, now illuminating the dust on the floor, the spot on the carpet where I had sat with the gun. It felt like a crime scene. I quickly grabbed my phone and charger and hurried out. Back at Kyle's, I went into their guest room and closed the door. I stared at Jenny's name in my contacts. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I prayed a new kind of prayer. not for God to fix it, but for the strength to tell the truth, no matter the cost. I pressed call. It went to voicemail. Her sweet, familiar voice told me to leave a message. The beep felt like a verdict. "Jenny," I began, my voice cracking. "It's Mark. I need to tell you something. Last night, I was in a very bad place, a dark place, and I had a gun." I took a shuddering breath, forcing the words out. "I was going to use it, but Kyle showed up. He saved my life." I could hear my own tears now. "I'm telling you this not to hurt you or to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the truth. I'm so sorry for everything. I'm getting help. I'm staying with Kyle and Lisa for a while. I needed you to know. I'm so sorry." I hung up. I had no idea what she would do with that information. Would it push her further away? Would she think it was a manipulative trick? I had no control over that. All I could do was offer the broken pieces and wait. The rest of the day was a blur of small, merciful distractions. I helped Kyle fix a leaky faucet. I read a picture book to his 3-year-old who curled up in my lap without a care in the world. I set the table for dinner. In the midst of the world's most painful crisis, I was being given the gift of mundane, ordinary tasks. They kept my mind from spiraling back into the darkness. That night, as I lay in the guest bed, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from Jenny. My hands shook as I opened it. It wasn't a long message. It wasn't forgiving. But it was there. "Jenny, I got your message. I'm glad you're safe. We can talk about this with Pastor Greg next week. I'll let you know the time." It wasn't an embrace. It was a door, cracked open just the tiniest bit. It was a thread of connection, thin and fragile. But it was there, and in that moment, it felt like a miracle. I didn't have my wife back. I didn't have my life back. But I had a next step. A terrifying, humbling meeting with my pastor and the woman I had betrayed. I closed my eyes, the image of the red 316 on the cable box seared into my memory. But now, superimposed over it, was another number, 317. The time everything didn't end. The time a knock on the door changed everything. The road ahead was long, and I knew it would be paved with more pain and consequence. But for the first time, I wasn't looking at the road from the end of a barrel. I was looking at it from a guest bed in a friend's house, with a text message on my phone that meant the conversation wasn't over. I had no idea what I would say to Jenny and Pastor Greg. I had no idea if I could ever fix what I broke. But as I drifted into a exhausted, dreamless sleep, I held on to one thing. I was alive to try. The week between Jenny's text and the meeting with Pastor Greg was the longest of my life. It was a strange purgatory, suspended between the hell I had created and the uncertain future I was too afraid to hope for. I stayed in Kyle and Lisa's guest room, which was painted a calming pale blue and had a quilt on the bed that Lisa's grandmother had made. It should have felt safe, but most nights I jolt awake at 3:16 a.m., my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest, the phantom cold of the gun barrel still pressed against my skin. Kyle and Lisa didn't treat me like I was made of glass, but they didn't treat me like everything was normal either. It was a delicate, careful balance. Lisa made sure I ate. Kyle made sure I didn't spend the whole day hiding in the guest room. He put me to work, raking leaves, organizing the garage, assembling a confusing new playset for the kids. The physical labor was a blessing. It exhausted my body enough to sometimes quiet my mind. I started seeing a therapist, a kind, older man named Dr. Evans, who had a gentle voice and asked questions that made me squirm. He didn't talk about God much. He talked about patterns. The pattern of seeking validation through achievement. The pattern of avoiding difficult emotions by burying myself in work. The pattern of using other people's admiration as a substitute for my own self-worth. And when that foundation of admiration started to crack, he said during our second session, when your wife was hurt and your friend was concerned, instead of facing the crack, you looked for a quicker, easier fix, a new source of admiration. He meant Chloe. He was right. It was ugly and true. I was building a house on sand, and when the storm came, I hadn't tried to reinforce the foundation. I just tried to build a flimsy new room on the side, which only made the whole structure more unstable. I spent a lot of time thinking about Kyle's words about God not being a vending machine. I realized my prayers had always been about what I wanted to get: success, comfort, relief. I had never learned how to pray to know God, to just be with Him, even in the silence, even in the pain. One afternoon, while the kids were napping, I found Lisa sitting at the kitchen table, her Bible open. She looked up and saw me hovering in the doorway. "You can come in, Mark," she said with a small smile. I shuffled in and sat down across from her. "I don't think I can read that right now," I admitted, nodding toward the Bible. "The words they don't stick." She nodded, not looking the least bit surprised. "That's okay. It's not a magic book. The words aren't the point." "Then what is?" "The person they point to," she said simply. "When I don't have the words or when they feel dead, I just sit. I just acknowledge He's here. Sometimes that's all there is." It sounded too simple, and yet it felt like the hardest thing in the world, to just sit in the wreckage without demanding He clean it up immediately. The day before the meeting with Pastor Greg, I hit a wall. The anxiety was a live wire under my skin. What if Jenny decided this was all too much? What if she used the meeting to officially tell me it was over? The despair started to creep back in, its familiar cold tendrils wrapping around my heart. The thought of the gun, now locked in Kyle's safe, whispered to me, "It would still be easier. You'd still be doing her a favor." I must have been pacing because Kyle found me in the backyard, staring blankly at the swing set. "You're spiraling," he said, not unkindly. "I can't do this, Kyle," I whispered, my voice tight. "I can't sit in a room with her and see how much I've hurt her. I can't." "You don't have a choice," he said, his voice firm. "This is the cost. Mark, this is what it means to start making things right. It's going to be awful. It's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. But you have to walk into that room." "Why?" I begged, feeling like a child. "Why do I have to?" "Because you love her," he said, his eyes holding mine. "And because this is the first real unselfish thing you will have done in a long time. You're not doing it to feel better. You're doing it because it's what she needs, even if it destroys you." His words cut through the self-pity. This wasn't about my comfort anymore. This was about Jenny's pain. And for the first time, I saw my attendance at that meeting not as a punishment I had to endure, but as a gift I could offer her. The gift of my presence, my attention, and my willingness to accept whatever she needed to say. The morning of the meeting, I put on a clean button-down shirt, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fasten the buttons. Kyle drove me to the church, but he didn't come in. "This is your path to walk, brother," he said, squeezing my shoulder. "We'll be right here praying." I walked into the familiar building, the scent of lemon polish and old hymnals hitting me like a wave. I'd been here so many times for celebrations, for worship, for community. Now it felt like a courtroom. Pastor Greg's office was warm and book-lined. He was already there, and he stood up as I entered, giving me a kind, somber smile. "Mark," he said, shaking my hand. His grip was firm. "Thank you for coming." And then Jenny walked in. She was thinner than I remembered, and she held herself tightly as if to keep from falling apart. She wouldn't look at me. She sat in the chair farthest from mine, her hands clasped in her lap. The space between us felt like a canyon. Pastor Greg began with a prayer, asking for wisdom and for the Spirit to guide us. I kept my eyes open, staring at the pattern on the rug, the words washing over me. "Jenny," Pastor Greg said gently, "would you like to start? This is a safe space for you to share what you're feeling." She took a deep, shaky breath, and then she looked at me. The pain in her eyes was so raw, so absolute that I had to fight the urge to look away. "You broke me, Mark," she began, her voice quiet but clear. "You looked me in the eye, and you lied to me. You made me feel like I was crazy for being worried. You let me blame our friend." A tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. "But that's not even the worst part." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze intensifying. "The worst part is that you took our marriage, this sacred thing we built with God, and you treated it like it was nothing. You treated me like I was nothing. You made a mockery of every prayer we ever prayed together, every vow we ever made. I don't even know who you are. The man I married would never have done this." Each word was a hammer blow, and I took them. I made myself look at her, to receive the full force of her anguish. She was right, about everything. "And then," she continued, her voice trembling with a new kind of anger, "you send me that voicemail about the gun. Do you have any idea what that did to me? Now, on top of everything else, I have to carry the fear that if I say the wrong thing, or if I can't forgive you, you might... She broke off, shaking her head, fresh tears flowing. "That wasn't fair, Mark. That was the most selfish thing you've done yet." I had thought my confession was an act of honesty. She saw it as the ultimate manipulation. And she wasn't wrong. In my pain, I hadn't considered the burden it would place on her. I had only thought of my own need to confess. She talked for a long time, listing the ways I had failed her, the specific moments of betrayal that haunted her the most. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I just listened. When she finally finished, exhausted and weeping quietly, the room was silent except for the sound of her tears. Pastor Greg looked at me. "Mark, do you have anything you'd like to say to Jenny?" I swallowed hard, my throat like sandpaper. I looked at my wife, truly looked at her, for the first time in months. "Jenny," I started, my voice rough, "everything you said is true. There is no excuse for what I did. I was a coward. I was prideful. I was selfish. I destroyed the most beautiful thing in my life, and I deeply, deeply hate the man who did that to you." I took a shuddering breath. "And you're right about the phone call, too. I was only thinking of myself. I am so sorry for putting that weight on you. It was unforgivable." I paused, letting my words hang in the air. This was the moment. This was the cost. "I don't expect you to forgive me," I said, and I meant it. "I don't deserve it. All I can do is stand here and tell you that I am sorry, with every broken piece of me. And I will spend the rest of my life, whether you're in it or not, trying to become a man who would never do something like that again." It was the most honest thing I had ever said. Jenny looked at me, her expression unreadable. The anger had faded, replaced by a profound, bottomless grief. She didn't say, "I forgive you." She didn't say, "Let's work it out." She just nodded slowly, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't a happy ending. But it was a beginning. The first painful, honest step on a road that had no guaranteed destination. And as I sat there in the silence, feeling the weight of what I had done and the reality of what I had lost, I felt something I hadn't felt in that room all morning. for the first time, I wasn't lying. The silence in the car on the way back to Kyle's was heavier than any silence I'd ever known. Kyle didn't ask how it went. He just turned on some soft instrumental music and let me stare out the window. The world outside was still moving. Cars heading to the mall. Families going out for early dinner. Completely unaware that my life had just been dismantled in a pastor's office. Jenny's words echoed in my head, each one a shard of glass turning in my gut. You broke me. You made a mockery of our vows. I don't even know who you are. She was right. The man I had been was dead. The problem was, I had no idea who was left in his place. When we got back to the house, Lisa took one look at my face and wordlessly handed me a plate with a sandwich on it. I took it to the backyard and sat on the steps, the food untouched beside me. I replayed every second of the meeting. The pain on Jenny's face. The quiet finality in her nod. It wasn't a nod of forgiveness. It was a nod of receipt. I hear you. That was all. The following days were a grind. Dr. Evans had me start journaling, which felt stupid and pointless. I'd sit with a notebook and a pen, and all I could write was, I am a liar. I am a cheat. I hurt Jenny. Over and over. Dr. Evans said we had to name the shame before we could disarm it. It just felt like carving my failures into paper. Kyle, seeing me struggle, started a new ritual. Every evening after dinner, he'd drag 2 lawn chairs to the end of his driveway, and we'd just sit and watch the neighborhood. We didn't talk much. We'd watch kids chase lightning bugs, couples walking their dogs, the sky changing from blue to orange to deep purple. It was in one of those quiet moments, watching the stars begin to prick through the twilight, that I felt it. Not a voice, not a feeling, but a thought that didn't feel like my own. I am here too. It wasn't in the thunder. It was in the stillness. It was in the simple, steadfast presence of a friend who didn't have to be there. It was in the fact that the sun kept setting and rising, that the world held together even when my own had fallen apart. The God I was starting to suspect was real, wasn't the vending machine in the sky. He was the one sitting in the silence with me. A week after the meeting, I got an email from HR. My medical leave was approved, but my position as senior project lead was being eliminated due to restructuring. There was a severance package, a lifeline that would buy me a few months to figure things out. It was a professional death, but it felt like a mercy, a clean break from the world that had fed my pride. The real test came on a Tuesday morning. My phone rang, and Jenny's name appeared on the screen. My heart leaped into my throat. We hadn't spoken since the meeting with Pastor Greg. I answered, my voice shaky. Jenny? Hi, she said. Her voice was calm, neutral. I'm at the house. I'm getting some of my things. There are a few boxes of your stuff in the garage. Old yearbooks, some trophies. I thought you might want them. It was a practical, logistical call. She was dismantling our life together, box by box. The finality of it was a physical blow. Okay, I managed to say. I can come get them. I'd prefer if you came while I'm not here, she said, and I could hear the strain beneath the calm. I'll leave the garage side door unlocked. You can come by after 1 o'clock. Jenny, I wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the chasm between us, but all my words felt cheap. I'll see you, Mark, she said, and hung up. Kyle drove me to the house at 1:15. Pulling onto our street felt like entering a ghost town of my own memories. Every house, every tree was a monument to a life that was over. My hands were sweating as we pulled into the driveway. Our driveway. The porch swing was still. Jenny's car was gone. I'll wait here, Kyle said, giving me space. I walked to the side garage door, my legs feeling like lead. It was unlocked, just as she'd said. I stepped inside. The garage was neat and organized, a testament to Jenny's care. And there, in the middle of the empty space, were 3 cardboard boxes. They looked so small, containing the artifacts of my former self. I knelt down and opened the first one, my high school football trophy, a stack of yearbooks, a framed photo of me and my college buddies. It was all so juvenile, so insignificant. This was what was left of the man Jenny had married. I carried the boxes out, one by one, loading them into the back of Kyle's SUV. Each trip felt like a funeral procession. On my last trip, I paused at the door that led from the garage into the kitchen. I put my hand on the doorknob. I didn't turn it. I just stood there, my forehead resting against the cool wood. I could picture the kitchen perfectly. The yellow curtains Jenny had sewn herself. The chip in the countertop from when I'd dropped a mug. The table where we'd shared 1,000 meals, where we'd prayed together, where I had lied to her over lasagna. A wave of grief so powerful it doubled me over, washed through me. It wasn't just guilt anymore. It was a deep, aching sorrow for what was lost, for the love I had squandered, for the home I had violated. I heard a car door shut. I froze, my heart hammering. I slowly turned around. Jenny was standing by her car, which was now parked on the street. She must have been waiting nearby. She had a bag of groceries in her arms. She was just standing there, watching me. Her expression was unreadable from this distance. I didn't move. I didn't wave. I just stood in the garage doorway, exposed, a trespasser in my own life. For a long moment, we just looked at each other across the expanse of the driveway. The distance between us felt infinite. Then she did something I didn't expect. She gave a small, slow nod. It was the same nod from Pastor Greg's office. An acknowledgement. Not welcome, not forgiveness, but a recognition that I was there, that this was happening. Then she turned and walked to the front door, unlocked it, and went inside without looking back. I stood there for another minute. The image of her face seared into my mind. She looked tired, sad, but not hateful. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't a reconciliation. But as I walked back to Kyle's car, my body felt strangely lighter. The boxes of my old life were in the trunk. The shell of my old home was behind me. The future was a terrifying, blank page. But I had looked my wife in the eye across the ruins of our marriage, and I had not looked away. And she had not looked away from me. It was a small, painful point of connection, a single, fragile thread in the vast, dark tapestry of our brokenness. As Kyle started the car and pulled away, I didn't look back at the house. I looked ahead, at the road. "You okay?" Kyle asked softly. "No," I answered, and it was the truth. But for the first time, it was an honest truth, without the poison of self-pity. But I'm here. And being here, I was starting to understand, was the only place grace could ever find you. The boxes sat in the corner of Kyle's garage for a week before I could bring myself to open them. They were a monument to a past life, and I was afraid of what I'd find inside, not the objects but the memories attached to them, the ghost of the man I used to be. Finally, on a rainy Saturday afternoon, with the sound of Kyle's kids playing a loud board game in the living room, I dragged the first box into the guest room. I lifted the flaps. On top was the framed college photo. I was in the middle, my arms slung around my friends, a cocky, easy smile on my face. I looked so young, so sure of everything. I didn't recognize him. I spent the next hour sifting through the debris of my past. Old report cards, a varsity letter, a stack of mixed CDs from a girlfriend in high school. It was also curated, a collection of achievements and milestones that told the story of Mark Miller. Success. There was nothing in here about failure, nothing about doubt, nothing about the nights I'd lain awake in college, terrified I wasn't good enough. I had packaged only the highlights. At the bottom of the last box, tucked under my old baseball glove, was a small, blue journal. I didn't recognize it. I pulled it out. The cover was blank. I opened it. Jenny's handwriting stared back at me. My breath caught in my throat. It was a prayer journal from early in our marriage. I shouldn't be reading this. It was a violation, but I couldn't stop myself. The entries were simple, mundane, and beautiful. Lord, thank you for the rain today. It felt cozy being stuck inside with Mark. Another, please be with Mark as he has his big meeting tomorrow. Give him peace. Help him to remember his worth isn't in his job, but in you. One, dated a few years back, made me weep. God, sometimes I feel like Mark is so stressed. He's chasing something I can't see. Please protect his heart. Help me to be a wife who supports him without feeding the emptiness. She had seen it. Years ago, she had seen the cracks I was so carefully plastering over. She wasn't praying for my success. She was praying for my soul, and I had been too busy, too proud, to notice. I closed the journal, holding it in my hands like a holy object. This was the truth of our marriage, not the public image, not the perfect couple teaching Sunday school, but this quiet, faithful, behind-the-scenes love that had been praying for me all along. And I had trampled it. That journal did something Dr. Evans and Kyle and all my own introspection hadn't been able to do. It made my sin specific. It wasn't just infidelity or pride anymore. It was the fact that I had ignored this tender, observant love that had seen the real me and loved me anyway. The weight of what I had lost became so heavy I could barely stand. I started attending a different church with Kyle and Lisa, a smaller one where no one knew me. I sat in the back row, and when the music played, I often didn't sing. I just listened to the words. They were about grace that was greater than all our sin, about a love that wouldn't let go. I wanted to believe it, but it felt like a language I didn't speak. After the service, a man named Robert, who was about my dad's age, introduced himself. He didn't ask what I did for a living. He just asked my name and welcomed me. The following week, he remembered my name. The week after that, he asked if I wanted to get coffee. I almost said no. I was so tired of pretending. But I went. We sat at a diner and he told me about his son who was in the army and about his garden. He didn't pry into my life. He just talked. It was the kind of simple, low-pressure kindness I hadn't realized I was starving for. Meanwhile, the practical realities of my life were closing in. The severance pay was a finite cushion. I needed a job. The thought of going back into an office of that high-pressure environment made me feel sick. I didn't trust myself there. The persona of successful Mark was a costume I never wanted to wear again. I started looking for anything that was the opposite of my old life. I applied for jobs at a landscaping company, a hardware store, a library. It was humbling. My polished resume, full of corporate jargon, looked ridiculous next to the simple requirements for stacking shelves or loading mulch. One evening, I was helping Lisa weed her vegetable garden. My phone buzzed with an email. It was from the library. I hadn't gotten the job. I sat back on my heels, the rich smell of soil filling my nostrils. I felt the old shame rising. You're a failure. You're not good enough for anything. But then I looked at the neat row of carrot tops I'd just weeded. The sun was warm on my back. From inside the house, I could hear Lisa laughing at something one of the kids said. This moment, right here, was real. It was simple. It was good. A thought, clear and quiet, formed in my mind. What if this is enough? What if being here, pulling weeds, being a broken man who is learning to be honest, is enough? It wasn't a voice from the sky. It was my own thought, but it felt new. It felt like the first sprout of a different kind of truth. My worth wasn't in a job title. It wasn't in being a husband. It wasn't in being a small group leader. Maybe it was just in being a creature of God, sitting in the dirt, learning how to be real. A few days later, Jenny texted me. It was the first time she had initiated contact since the day I picked up the boxes. Jenny, the kitchen faucet is leaking. It's getting worse. I don't know who to call. I stared at the message. It wasn't an invitation. It was a problem. But it was a problem I could fix. In our old life, I would have immediately called a plumber, thrown money at the issue to make it go away quickly so I could get back to work. I typed back, my hands steady. Me. I can fix it. I've been helping Kyle with stuff around his house. I can come by tomorrow if you want. No pressure. You don't have to be there. The 3 dots appeared. They bounced for a long time. Jenny. Okay. I'll leave the key under the mat. Thank you. The next day, I bought a new washer and valve seat from the hardware store. Kyle lent me his tools. Driving to the house felt different this time. I wasn't going to collect the remnants of my past. I was going to perform a simple act of service. I let myself in. The house was quiet and clean. It felt different, more like her space, and less like ours. I went straight to the kitchen, trying not to look around, not to soak in the memories. I laid a towel under the sink and got to work. It was a fiddly job, my hands fumbling with the small parts. But I took my time. There was a quiet satisfaction in diagnosing the problem and taking things apart and carefully putting them back together, making them whole again. It took me over an hour. When I was done, I turned the water back on and tested the faucet. The drip was gone. I cleaned up my mess, making sure everything was spotless. As I was gathering my tools, I saw it. Sitting on the counter was a single, fresh-baked chocolate chip cookie on a napkin. My heart stopped. She must have come home while I was working, and I hadn't heard her. She had been in the house with me, and she had left this. It wasn't a conversation, it wasn't forgiveness, it was a cookie. A small, tangible gesture of what? Acknowledgement? A truce? A tiny spark of the kindness that had once defined her? I left the key under the mat and drove back to Kyle's, the cookie uneaten on the passenger seat. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't try to analyze it or build a future on it. But that night, for the first time since the night with the gun, I didn't wake up at 3:16 a.m. I slept straight through until the morning. When I opened my eyes, sunlight was streaming into the blue guest room. The world was quiet. And for a single fleeting moment before the memory of all my failures rushed back in, I felt a peace that needed no explanation. The faucet was fixed. The drip had stopped. And for one night, so had the chaos in my soul. The cookie sat on my dresser for 3 days. I didn't eat it. It wasn't a snack. It was a symbol. And I was afraid of what consuming it might mean. Was it a peace offering? A moment of pity? A crumb of the past she was tossing to the dog she'd put out? I'd pick it up, study its perfect chocolate chips, the slight sheen of butter on its surface, and then put it back down. It was the most confusing and beautiful thing I owned. Dr. Evans, when I told him about it, didn't analyze it. He just smiled a little and said, "Sometimes a cookie is just a cookie, and sometimes it's a small miracle. The question is, can you accept it without building a fantasy on top of it?" I started working part-time for Robert, the man from church. He ran a small nonprofit that repaired homes for low-income elderly people. He didn't care about my resume. He cared if I could swing a hammer without hitting my thumb. My first day, he put a paint scraper in my hand and set me to work on a peeling windowsill on a tiny, weathered house owned by a woman named Mrs. Gable. She brought us lemonade and called us her boys. The work was hard, menial, and deeply satisfying. There was no corporate ladder. There was only the next task: scraping, sanding, priming. The goal wasn't a promotion or a bonus, it was a painted windowsill that would keep the rain out for another few years. At the end of the day, my body ached, but my mind was quiet. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't strategizing or performing, I was just serving. I started reading Jenny's old prayer journal, one entry a night. It was like listening to her heart from a distance of years. I read about her hopes for our future children, her prayers for her sick mother, her simple gratitude for a lazy Saturday. I saw a depth to her I had been too self-absorbed to appreciate. I wasn't reading it to win her back. I was reading it to finally, truly, know the woman I had married. One entry, from about a year before everything fell apart, stopped me cold. Lord, I feel Mark slipping away. He's so successful, but he's so unhappy. The light in his eyes is gone. I try to talk to him, but he's like a fortress. I don't know how to reach him. All I can do is love him and pray. Please, send someone to knock down his walls. Do whatever it takes to bring him back to you and back to me. I close the journal, my hands trembling. Do whatever it takes. The words echoed in the quiet room. Had God answered that prayer? Had the affair, the shame, the loss of everything, been the answer to my wife's desperate plea to do whatever it takes to save me? The thought was too terrible, too immense to fully grasp. It didn't make the sin okay. Nothing could. But it introduced a terrifying, holy possibility into the narrative of my destruction. That a loving God might have allowed the collapse of the shaky tower I'd built in order to save me from the much greater fall that was coming. I didn't hear from Jenny again for 2 weeks. I didn't contact her. I worked with Robert. I went to therapy. I sat in the backyard with Kyle. I was learning to be still. The frantic, desperate prayers had stopped. Now my prayers were simpler, quieter. Thank you for this food. Help me to be useful today. Be with Jenny. I was no longer demanding a blueprint for my life. I was just asking for daily bread. Then, on a Tuesday, my phone rang. It was Jenny. This time, my heart didn't leap with panicked hope. It settled into a steady, sober rhythm. I answered. "Hi," she said. Her voice was clearer than it had been in months. "I got a letter from the life insurance company. There's some paperwork about your policy from your old job that needs your signature." "Okay," I said. "I can come by and sign it." There was a pause. "I was thinking," she said, her words careful, measured. "We could meet somewhere, neutral ground. There's a coffee shop on Elm Street. We could talk." A public place, neutral ground. It was a boundary, and a wise one. She wasn't ready to have me in the house again, but she was willing to be seen with me. "I'd like that," I said, and I meant it. The coffee shop was bright and noisy. The clatter of cups and the hiss of the steam wand a welcome distraction. I got there early and chose a table in the corner. When Jenny walked in, she looked different. She stood straighter. She met my eyes and gave a small, tentative smile. It didn't reach her eyes, but it was there. She sat down, placing a manila folder on the table between us. We made awkward small talk about the weather, about Mrs. Gable's house that I'd told her about, in a brief, non-pressure text the week before. It was stilted, but it was communication. After the coffee arrived, she slid the folder toward me. "It's just the beneficiary form. They need a signature on page 3. I opened the folder. The form was straightforward, but my eyes snagged on a line near the top. Primary beneficiary, Jennifer Marie Miller. She was still my beneficiary. Through all of it, she hadn't changed it. I looked up at her, questions in my eyes. She looked down, stirring her latte. "I thought about changing it," she said softly. "After your voicemail. I was so angry. It felt like a trap. But then I realized that would be me giving up on you too. And I couldn't do that. Even if we don't end up together, I still believe God isn't finished with you." Tears pricked my eyes. This was not the passionate, wounded anger from Pastor Greg's office. This was something quieter, stronger, and far more powerful. It was a choice, a decision to hope, not in a specific outcome, but in the character of God. "Thank you," I whispered, the words utterly inadequate. I signed the form and slid it back to her. We sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the coffee shop swirling around our quiet island. "I read your journal," I said suddenly, the confession tumbling out. "The one in the box. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. But I did, and I read your prayer. The do whatever it takes one." Her eyes widened slightly, then filled with tears. She looked away, out the window. "I meant it," she whispered. "I know," I said. "And I'm so sorry that the whatever it takes had to be so much pain for you." She looked back at me, a single tear tracing the same path it had in Pastor Greg's office. "Me too." It wasn't a reconciliation. We didn't hold hands. We didn't make plans. But as we stood to leave, she didn't immediately walk away. We stood on the sidewalk outside the coffee shop, the spring sun warm on our faces. "The cookie was good," I said. A real, genuine smile, small but true, finally touched her eyes. "I know." She turned and walked toward her car. I watched her go, not with the desperate longing of before, but with a profound, aching gratitude. The woman who had prayed for God to bring me back at any cost was walking away, and she had left me with a signed form, a memory of a cookie, and a smile. I got into my car but didn't start it. I sat there for a long time, watching people come and go from the coffee shop. The world was full of people carrying their own quiet burdens, their own secret pains. And for the first time, I didn't feel separate from them. I felt connected. I was one of them. Broken, yes, scarred, definitely, but held. I looked at the clock. It was 3:17 in the afternoon, a mirror image of the hour that had once meant the end of everything. Now, it was just a time. A time on a sunny afternoon after I had coffee with my wife. I started the car and drove back to work, to the half-painted house of someone who needed my help. The road ahead was still long, and the future with Jenny was still a question mark. But the despair was gone. In its place was a quiet, steady hope, forged not in the absence of pain, but right in the middle of it. The door at 3:17 a.m. had been opened, and now I was finally walking through it. The paint on Mrs. Gable's house was a soft, buttery yellow. As I swept the final strokes across the clapboard siding, a sense of completion settled over me that no corporate merger had ever delivered. Robert came around the corner, wiping his forehead with a bandana. "Looks good, Mark. Real good." He squinted at the house. "You know, you've got a knack for this. You're careful. You see the details." The praise was simple, earned with sore muscles and paint-splattered jeans, and it meant more to me than any performance review. I was learning a new language, the language of tangible things, of fixed leaks and painted walls, where the result of your labor was right there in front of you, honest and plain. I started attending a weekly men's group at the new church. It was nothing like the small group I'd led. There were no polished insights here. There was Carl, a mechanic whose wife had left him after 20 years. There was Ben, a quiet man fighting a daily battle with alcohol. We didn't talk about theology. We talked about our triggers, our fears, the days we barely made it out of bed. We prayed simple, stumbling prayers for each other. For the first time, I was in a community where I didn't have to pretend I had it all together. I was just Mark, the guy who was trying to figure out how to live after he'd blown up his life. One night, Ben mentioned he'd been sober for 30 days. It was a huge milestone. After the group, a few of us went to a diner to celebrate with him, drinking bad coffee and eating pie. As I sat in the cracked vinyl booth, listening to Carl tell a story about a disastrous carburetor repair, I felt a sense of belonging so profound it ached. This was the body of Christ, not a showcase for the righteous, but a hospital for the broken. My conversations with Jenny, while still rare, had settled into a new rhythm. They were practical, but not cold. We talked about bills, about the house, about a card that had come for both of us from distant relatives. It was the mundane scaffolding of a shared life, and we were carefully, tentatively, seeing if it could still bear any weight. Then, on a humid Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Chloe. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. I hadn't heard from her since I'd left the company. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text came through. "Chloe, I know you probably hate me, but I need to talk to you. It's important." A part of me, the old, prideful part, was curious. What did she want? An apology? A chance to rekindle something? The thought was nauseating. Another part of me was terrified. Talking to her felt like stepping back into the quicksand. I showed the text to Kyle that evening. He read it, his face grim. "You don't owe her anything, Mark." "I know," I said. "But what if it's something about work? A lawsuit or something?" The old anxiety, the fear of consequences began to claw its way back. "Then, let the lawyers handle it," Lisa said from the sink, her voice firm. "You engaging with her is like an alcoholic taking just one sip. It's not worth the risk." They were right. I knew they were right. But the text gnawed at me. "It's important." The words hooked into my fear. I spent a sleepless night the past whispering to me, trying to pull me back into its drama. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done before. I drove to Robert's worksite early before anyone else arrived. I sat in my car, the dawn light painting the sky in streaks of pink and orange, and I prayed. Not a long, elaborate prayer. Just 3 words, repeated like a mantra. "God, help me." I didn't hear a voice, but a clarity settled in my spirit. Engaging with Chloe was about my own fear and my own pride. The fear of unseen consequences, the pride of still mattering to her in some way. It was a path leading backward. My path, the one God had carved out through so much pain, was leading forward. It was leading toward humility, toward quiet service, toward a possible patient future with Jenny. I picked up my phone. My finger hovered over Chloe's name. Then I opened my contacts, found her number, and pressed block. I did the same for her email address. It was a small action, a digital severance, but it felt like one of the most significant choices I had ever made. I was choosing my new, fragile life over the ghosts of the old one. I was saying no to the drama and yes to the quiet. I was actively protecting the redemption I was living, hour by hour. A sense of peace, solid and real, washed over me. The gnawing anxiety vanished. I had faced the temptation to look back, and I had kept walking forward. That Saturday, I was at the house, mowing Kyle's lawn. The smell of cut grass was sweet and clean. My phone, sitting on the porch steps, buzzed. It was Jenny. "Jenny, the lilacs are blooming. You always loved the smell. They're especially nice this year." I stopped the mower, the sudden silence ringing in my ears. I looked at the message, reading it over and over. It wasn't about a leaky faucet or an insurance form. It was about beauty. It was a shared memory. She was offering me a piece of our past that was still alive, still fragrant. I didn't know what to say. A dozen responses flew through my mind. I could suggest going to see them. I could write a poem. I could tell her how much I missed it. But I heard Dr. Evans's voice in my head. "Don't grasp. Receive." I typed back a simple, truthful response. "Me. I can almost smell them from here. That's my favorite smell in the world. Thank you for telling me." I didn't add anything else. I didn't ask a question. I just received her gift and acknowledged it. Her response came a few minutes later. Jenny, I know. I stood there in the middle of the lawn, the sun on my back, the smell of cut grass, and distant lilacs in the air, and I felt a joy so pure and so quiet, it was almost like pain. It wasn't the joy of possession or guaranteed outcome. It was the joy of connection. A thin, golden thread of shared memory and present kindness stretching across the distance between us. I had blocked the path to my past, and in the space that action created, a window to a possible future had cracked open, letting in the scent of lilacs. I started the mower again, the engine roaring to life. The work ahead was simple. The grass needed cutting. The sun was shining. And for today, that was more than enough. The long winter was finally, undeniably, over. I never ate the cookie. It eventually hardened into a fossil of that fragile moment, and I buried it in the backyard of Kyle's house one evening after dinner. A quiet funeral for a season of pain and a tiny, offered kindness. It felt right. Some things are meant to be remembered, not consumed. Weeks turned into months. The rhythm of my new life became familiar. Work with Robert, men's group on Tuesdays, therapy on Thursdays. I moved out of Kyle's guest room and into a small, sparse apartment of my own. It wasn't a home, but it was a place of my own making, filled with quiet and the absence of lies. Jenny and I started meeting for coffee every other week. The conversations slowly deepened, moving from logistics to books she was reading, to my work with Robert, to her new job at a floral shop. We were learning how to be friends. It was awkward and tender and slow. We never talked about us. We talked about ourselves, as we were now two people who had been shattered and were slowly, independently, gathering their pieces. One evening, I was sitting on the floor of my new apartment, assembling a cheap bookshelf, when I found myself humming. It was a hymn we'd sung in church that Sunday, one I hadn't heard since I was a boy. I stopped, surprised by the sound of my own voice, by the unforced lightness in it. The constant, low-grade hum of shame that had been my background noise for so long was gone. In its place was a stillness that, on its best days, could even be called peace. The 1-year anniversary of the night with the gun approached. I dreaded it. I expected the old ghosts to come whispering back. The morning of, I woke up early. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed 6:18 a.m. I had slept through the night. I lay there, waiting for the panic, for the phantom cold of the rifle. It never came. The memory was there, sharp and terrible, but it no longer had power over me. It was a scar, not a wound. I spent the day with Robert, replacing rotten boards on a porch for a veteran named Joe. We worked in comfortable silence, the sound of our hammers a steady percussion against the birdsong. As we were packing up the tools, Joe, a man of few words, grunted, "You're a good worker. Steady." It was the finest compliment I had ever received. That evening, I drove to the church. I didn't go inside. I just sat in my car in the empty parking lot, the same parking lot where I had told Kyle to stay out of my life. The pavement was the same, the lights were the same, but I was not. My phone buzzed. It was Jenny. "Jenny, thinking of you today. I know what day it is. I'm glad you're here." I read the words, and the last of the walls around my heart crumbled into dust. She wasn't just glad I was there with her. She was glad I was here, on the planet, alive. I started the car, but I didn't drive home. I drove to our old street. I didn't get out. I just parked across the street and looked at the house. The porch light was on, casting a warm, golden glow on the swing. The lilac bush by the door was a dark silhouette in the twilight. I saw her then, through the living room window. Jenny was moving around, watering a plant. She was wearing one of my old sweatshirts, the one I'd thought was lost in the move. She paused, looking out the window, but she didn't see me in the dark car. She stood there for a long time, just looking out at the night. Then she placed her hand flat against the glass, a quiet, solitary gesture. I didn't know what it meant. Was it a goodbye? A remembrance? A prayer? I would probably never know. And for the first time, I was okay with that. Her heart was her own territory, and I had forfeited my right to map it. My job was not to decipher her gestures, but to respect them, to love her from this distance with a patience I had never possessed before. I drove home to my quiet apartment. I finished assembling the bookshelf. I placed a few books on it, a novel, a book on woodworking, the small blue journal that had taught me how to love my wife. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I knelt beside my bed, not in desperate supplication, but in quiet posture. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't beg for a specific future. Thank you, I whispered into the stillness, for the knock on the door, for the friends who didn't give up, for the work that rebuilds my hands, for the silence that taught me to listen, for Jenny's life, and for mine. The redemption hadn't come in a single, blinding moment. It had come quietly, in the patient love of friends, in the humility of manual labor, in the terrifying gift of consequences, and in the slow, stubborn dawning of grace, in a heart that had tried its hardest to die. The story wasn't over. My relationship with Jenny was still a delicate, budding thing, with no guarantee it would ever be what it was. But I was no longer the man clutching a gun in the dark. I was a man on his knees in a quiet room, learning the deepest, most profound truth of all, that sometimes the greatest miracle isn't the healing, but the wound that makes the healing possible. The knock on the door at 3:17 a.m. hadn't just saved my life. It had finally given me one worth living.